Hello everyone. If you love heartwarming animal stories and want to follow the inspiring journey of these adorable friends, don't forget to hit the subscribe button now so you won't miss any of our videos. Now, let's dive into today's emotional story. The shelter was dimly lit, a mix of shadows and harsh fluorescent lights illuminating rows of cages that lined the walls. The air was thick with the sounds of barking dogs, each hoping for a glimpse of someone who might offer them the life they dreamed of. Yet, in the farthest corner of the shelter, there was one dog that seemed to be ignored by all. Duke, a large German Shepherd mix with patches of gray in his once sleek coat. His eyes, though still alert, held a sadness, an understanding of the neglect he had endured. He had been at the shelter for months, abandoned at an age when most people wanted a young dog full of energy. The years had made Duke a different kind of dog, one who had been overlooked by countless families, deemed too old, too big, and too quiet. Duke's days in the shelter had become a routine, eating, sleeping, and watching the other dogs find homes, while he remained behind bars, his only company the occasional shelter worker who patted his head out of pity. Though Duke didn't have the strength to show it anymore, the longing for a home, for a family who would truly care for him, still burned within his heart. On the other side of town, the Turner family, Jane, Peter, and their two children, Lily and Max, were going through a difficult transition. Jane and Peter had recently moved to a new home in a suburban neighborhood. The adjustment had been harder than they anticipated. Between unpacking boxes, finding new schools for the kids, and settling into new routines, they felt disconnected. Emma, their 7-year-old daughter, had been especially withdrawn. She had always been a bubbly and energetic girl, but something had changed. The move had taken a toll on her. The laughter that once filled their house was rare now, replaced by silence and occasional fits of frustration. Jane and Peter were determined to help Emma adjust, to bring back the joy they once had as a family. One night, while sitting together at the kitchen table, Jane suggested, "What if we adopt a dog? Something to help Emma feel settled, something that can bring life back into the house." Peter, though hesitant at first, agreed. "A dog might be just what we need to get back to normal." The next day, they all visited the local shelter, excited about the idea of giving a dog a loving home. When they arrived, the air was thick with the sounds of excited barking, and the sight of so many dogs behind bars was overwhelming. But as they walked down the aisle of cages, their eyes eventually landed on Duke. His cage was tucked away in a corner, far from the more energetic and playful pups. He sat quietly, watching them with a calm, knowing gaze. "Look at him," Emma said, her voice soft, almost as if she had made a discovery. She stepped closer to Duke's cage, and for the first time since they had moved, a spark of life seemed to return to her eyes. Jane and Peter exchanged a look. They were here for a puppy, something small, energetic, and easy to care for. But Emma's connection with Duke was undeniable. "Mom, I want him," Emma said, her voice unwavering. Jane knelt down beside Emma, her heart tugging. She had never seen her daughter connect with anything like this before. Despite Duke's age and the uncertainty surrounding adopting an older dog, Jane could feel the change in Emma. She had chosen him, this dog who had been overlooked for so long. "I think he'll be good for us," Emma added, her eyes wide with hope. Peter sighed but smiled. He could see that this was important to his daughter, and something in his heart told him that maybe, just maybe, Duke was the right choice after all. "All right," Peter said, the weight of the decision settling in. "We'll take him." With that, Duke was adopted. The shelter workers helped them with the paperwork, and Emma stood beside Duke's cage as he was let out, his tail giving a slow wag, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and disbelief. As they drove home, the air in the car was filled with the sounds of Emma talking to Duke, her voice excited and filled with wonder. She told him about their new home, about the room he would sleep in, and all the fun things they would do together. Duke, though tired from the long wait at the shelter, responded by nudging Emma's hand with his nose, as if to say, "I'm here with you now." Little did they know that this quiet, older dog would become the key to mending their broken family, to bringing them closer together in ways they could never have imagined. Duke was not just a dog, he was about to become their protector, their comfort, and the bridge that would heal all their wounds. In the weeks that followed, Duke settled into the Turner family's home. Despite being an older dog, Duke quickly adapted to his new surroundings. He wasn't the energetic, playful puppy that Emma had imagined when she first saw him at the shelter, but there was a quiet strength in his demeanor that made him the perfect companion for the family. Duke's movements were slower now, but his eyes, always alert, still held a spark of curiosity and intelligence. At first, the family didn't know what to expect. Emma, who had always been a shy child, spent hours sitting beside Duke, speaking to him softly. She would tell him her worries, and he would listen intently, his head tilting to one side as if he understood every word. It was a comfort to her, a sense of companionship that she hadn't felt in a long time. Her parents noticed a change in her behavior. The once withdrawn and quiet child began to open up. She no longer spent hours in her room, staring out the window in silence. Instead, she spent time with Duke, playing with him in the yard, talking to him about her day. Emma's laughter, soft at first, began to fill the house again. It was as if Duke had unlocked a part of her heart that had been closed off for months. But while Emma was thriving, her parents were struggling. Jane and Peter had hoped that adopting Duke would bring their family closer, but the tension between them was still palpable. Jane worked long hours as a pediatric nurse, and Peter often found himself too wrapped up in his own thoughts to truly connect with his wife. Their relationship, once filled with love and excitement, had slowly grown distant. They were both so focused on Emma's well-being that they forgot to nurture their own bond. One night, after putting Emma to bed, Jane sat on the couch, her eyes tired from a long day at the hospital. Peter sat beside her, the silence between them heavy and awkward. Duke, sensing the distance, climbed onto the couch and laid his head in Jane's lap. She absent-mindedly ran her fingers through his fur, finding comfort in the simple act. Peter, looking at the dog, said softly, "He's really helped her, hasn't he?" Jane nodded, her throat tight. "I don't think I've ever seen her so happy." They both sat in silence, watching Duke, who had now curled up contentedly at their feet. There was something about the dog's calm presence that made the house feel more peaceful, more alive. For the first time in months, Jane felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Duke could help them too. In the days that followed, Peter began to spend more time with Duke. He took him for walks around the neighborhood, and slowly, their bond grew stronger. Duke, always patient, seemed to understand Peter's mood, gently nudging him when he needed it. Peter found himself talking to the dog, sharing his frustrations and fears. It was easier, somehow, to speak to Duke than to his wife. One evening, as the family sat together in the living room, Emma laughing as Duke chased after a ball, Jane looked at her husband and realized that the change they had all been waiting for had started. Duke wasn't just Emma's dog anymore. He was becoming part of their family, healing not just Emma, but all of them. The family's rhythm was still uneven, but now there was hope. Duke's quiet love and unwavering loyalty were slowly bridging the gaps between them, helping them rediscover what they had lost. Even though the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, they now had a sense of unity. And it was all because of a dog, one who had been forgotten, left behind, and yet, who had so much love left to give. It was a cool autumn evening when the Turner family's lives were forever altered. The house was quiet, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun. Jane and Peter were in the kitchen, preparing dinner, while Emma played with Duke in the living room. The rhythmic sound of Duke's paws echoed softly as he followed Emma around the house, his tail wagging energetically. For once, the atmosphere in the house felt peaceful, like the calm before a storm, even though no one could have predicted what was to come. Emma had become attached to Duke more than ever. She'd confided in him her deepest fears, her dreams, and everything in between. Duke, in return, was her rock. He'd watch over her with a protective gaze, never straying far from her side. He seemed to know when she was sad, when she needed comfort, and when she just wanted a friend. But it wasn't just Emma who had found solace in Duke's company. Jane and Peter were starting to find comfort in the dog too. They'd begun to reconnect, their conversations no longer dominated by silence or tension. But the peace would soon be shattered. At around midnight, Jane was finishing up some paperwork when she heard a faint noise. A creak in the floorboards. The unmistakable sound of the front door opening. Her heart skipped a beat as she glanced at the clock. Peter was still in the living room. So who could it be? She rose from her chair, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. The house was still, except for Duke, who had suddenly stopped wagging his tail and was staring intently at the door. Before she could react, there was another noise, this time, a soft scratch on the kitchen door. Jane's heart raced as she slowly approached the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. The dog's ears were flat, and his body was tense, as if he sensed danger long before she did. When Jane opened the door slightly, her breath caught in her throat. There, standing in the shadows, was a man, tall, hooded, and with a posture that screamed hostility. He hadn't been seen before, and he certainly wasn't someone they knew. "Who are you?" Jane's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of fear. The man's voice was low, gruff. "I'm here for something." Before Jane could say another word, Duke suddenly sprang forward. His bark was loud and fierce, filling the empty night air with urgency. Jane's heart leapt in her chest as Duke lunged toward the intruder, teeth bared, a protective snarl rippling through his body. The man took a step back, his face a mixture of confusion and alarm. Duke wasn't just barking, he was ready to defend. "Duke, stop!" Jane called out in panic, but Duke was relentless. He wasn't just a dog, he was the guardian of his family. His instincts had kicked in, and the bond between them, all particularly with Emma, had forged him into something more than just a pet. He was family. The man hesitated, visibly unnerved by the dog's sudden aggression. It was enough time for Peter to run into the hallway, grabbing a baseball bat that had been leaning against the wall. The intruder, now realizing he had miscalculated, turned and bolted for the door. But Duke wasn't done. With a final growl, Duke chased him out, standing guard at the door as the man disappeared into the night. The house fell silent again, save for the sound of Duke's labored breathing. Jane and Peter stood frozen, the gravity of the situation slowly sinking in. Jane slowly stepped back into the house, shaking with a mix of fear and gratitude. She hugged Duke tightly, her heart racing. "You saved us," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. You saved us." Peter rushed to her side, nodding in disbelief. That was unreal." Emma, woken by the commotion, appeared at the top of the stairs. Her wide eyes searched for her parents and then landed on Duke, who was still standing vigil at the door. "What happened?" Emma asked, her small voice trembling. "Duke protected us, sweetheart," Peter replied, pulling her into a hug. "He kept us safe." As the reality of the night unfolded, Jane and Peter exchanged a glance, one that spoke volumes about the depth of their gratitude for Duke. This wasn't just a dog they had adopted. He had become the cornerstone of their family. He had filled the space where there was once only fear and uncertainty, and now, he had given them the courage to stand together, to fight for their safety, and to protect each other. The following morning, the Turner family gathered in the living room. The police had come and gone, and the house was back to its quiet routine. But something was different now. There was an unspoken understanding between them all. They knew that they had to stick together, that the love they shared, the bond they'd formed, would always keep them safe. And it was all thanks to a dog who had been left behind, forgotten by everyone except the little girl who saw him for what he truly was: a protector, a friend, and an irreplaceable member of the family. In the weeks following the break-in, the Turner family began to feel the weight of the traumatic event, but also an overwhelming sense of unity that had never existed before. Duke had not only protected them physically, but emotionally as well. It was as if the very presence of the dog had transformed the family's dynamics. They no longer lived in the strained, quiet atmosphere they had once known. Every corner of the house now felt filled with love and gratitude, and Duke was at the heart of it all. The night of the break-in had been a wake-up call for Jane and Peter. They had been so consumed by their individual struggles that they had forgotten the importance of their bond as a couple and as a family. But Duke's bravery had reignited a fire within them. The family was no longer distant or disconnected, as they had been before. Instead, they were stronger than ever, united by the love of a dog who had shown them what it meant to fight for one another. Emma, too, had changed. The constant presence of Duke was the anchor she needed, the source of her comfort in times of uncertainty. No longer did she hide in the shadows of her room, too afraid to face the world outside. Duke had helped her find her voice, her courage, and a renewed sense of security. Every day, they spent time together, whether it was in the backyard playing fetch, or simply sitting side by side in the living room. Duke's quiet companionship allowed Emma to be herself again, to rediscover the joy she had lost in the wake of her parents' separation. One afternoon, Jane and Peter sat together on the couch, the sun streaming through the windows, casting a warm glow across the room. Duke lay beside them, his head resting on Emma's lap, the bond between the dog and the girl stronger than ever. "I never thought it would come to this," Peter said, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "I never realized how much we needed him." Jane nodded, her eyes glistening. "I don't think I fully understood what Duke could bring to this family until that night. He saved us, Peter. He saved us in ways we never could have imagined." "I know," Peter replied. He reached over and took Jane's hand in his. "I can't believe we almost gave him up." The guilt of that decision still lingered in Jane's heart, but she knew now that they had made the right choice. The decision to adopt Duke had not just given Emma a companion, it had healed the entire family. And though they had been through the darkest of times, they had emerged stronger and more united than ever. As they looked at Emma, who was laughing softly as she stroked Duke's fur, it was clear that the bond between the girl and the dog was something irreplaceable. Emma's laughter was no longer hesitant or guarded. It was genuine, free, and filled with a newfound sense of hope. Duke's presence had made all the difference in her life, and in return, she had become the light in his. Later that evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Duke settled by the door, content and peaceful. The house had become a home once more. Laughter and conversation filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, the Turners felt like a true family. It wasn't just the roof over their heads that made this house a home, it was the love they shared, the moments of vulnerability they had allowed themselves to experience, and the unbreakable bond they had with each other and with Duke. As they finished their meal, Peter stood up and made a toast, raising his glass toward Duke. To Duke, Peter said, his voice thick with emotion. For being our protector, our healer, and for reminding us what really matters. We're a family again, thanks to you. The family raised their glasses, and Emma smiled at Duke, who wagged his tail in response. It was a small gesture, but it held so much meaning. In that moment, the Turner family realized just how much they had changed and how much they owed to the dog who had been forgotten, but had become their savior, their anchor, and their greatest gift. And so, the Turner family continued their journey together, not just as parents and children, but as a unit that had been forever transformed by the love and loyalty of a dog. Their story would be one of redemption, healing, and the power of love, showing that even in the darkest of times, something beautiful can emerge, as long as you have the courage to let it in. The story of Duke and the Turner family teaches us a powerful lesson about the transformative power of love, loyalty, and the importance of companionship in times of crisis. Often, we may overlook the potential for healing that animals bring into our lives, but Duke's presence in the Turner family proved that even in the most difficult times, a pet can be the anchor that holds us together. The Turners' emotional distance was bridged by their shared love for Duke, reminding us that healing, especially in strained relationships, can come from the simplest sources like a pet's loyalty and unconditional love. It also highlights the importance of not underestimating the value of something or someone who may seem overlooked or forgotten. Sometimes, the most significant changes in our lives come from unexpected places. In real life, this message encourages us to look beyond the surface and embrace those who offer us comfort, whether it's a family member, a friend, or even a pet. Relationships, both human and animal, need nurturing, and this story exemplifies how connection and understanding can rebuild even the most fractured bonds.